Hey friends, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Shannon and today I'm going to be sharing with you my favourite books of 2021. So I have got a pile of 11 books here to share with you today, and I've divided it into genres rather than going through it in order that I read them, just because genres makes a bit more sense to me. So without further ado, I'm just going to get straight into the lovely list. So first off is the young adult books I read in 2021. There are two favourites in this pile. The first one was Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, and I buddy read this with Olivia from Olivia's Catastrophe, and we had a great time reading this. We both gave it 5 stars. We both said it would be a favourite book going forward, and I knew as soon as I finished it that this was going to make my favourites of 2021 list, and here it is. So Pet is set in a sort of dystopian world in the city of Lucille where there are no more monsters, but there is a backstory and history to this town where there clearly used to be monsters, and it follows our main character Jam and her best friend Redemption and both of their families. I really loved the family aspect of this, but quite early on there's a little surprise when Jam meets Pet, and then she starts to question everything that she's been told about her world. And it's all I'm going to tell you because it's best going in blind, but the writing was fantastic. It was so beautifully written, and I loved what Akwaeke Emezi did with the story. Just everything was perfect. There were so many aspects of this that I loved. Like I said, the family dynamics, an aspect of this very short book as well. It packs a punch. Pet is also an incredibly diverse book, as the main character Jam is a black trans girl who is selectively non-verbal and uses sign language throughout the book. And I loved how all of that was handled. It was done just so well. So I cannot recommend this one enough. Great read. If you have it on your TBR shelf or you've been meaning to pick it up for a while, I would recommend that you do so. It's really quick to get through and just everything about it was fantastic. The next book in the YA category that made it onto my favourites list of 2021 was The Henna Wars by Adiba Jagadar, and again this is one that comes highly recommended and I can completely see why. I sped through this and adored every second of it. So this one follows our main character Nishat, who comes out to her Bangladeshi parents and sister as she is gay, and she tells them that she is a lesbian at the beginning of the book, and the book just sort of follows on from there with her dealing with their reactions and her no longer having to sort of hide that from them. But it's so much more than that, because a new girl starts at Nishat's school called Flavia, and for their business class they each have to create a sort of new business in different groups, and Nishat and Flavia both come up with the same idea, which is to start a henna business, hence the name of the book, The Henna Wars. But like I said, this book is so much more than that, and I just got so much feeling out of this book. It was just amazing, start to finish. Again, the diversity in how it was handled and the topics that were handled were just done so well, and I can see why people love this one so much, and I cannot wait to read Adiba Jagadar's other book that recently came out, and I also got it for Christmas by the lovely Sylvie from the TBR Diaries, so I cannot wait to get to that one because I just love this one so much. So again, one that I would just highly recommend. Now moving on to our non-fiction books. So the first book that I have to talk about that of course made it to this list is The Henna Wars by Kate Moore, and I read this early on in the year, and again it was one that I knew as soon as I finished it, it was going to be on this list, because this book made me feel some things, some really angry things, and I don't think a book has ever made me feel that way before, but in an angry way that was empowering but also so frustrating, and just, oh my goodness, it was so good. So this one, as the title suggests, is the non-fiction story of the Radium Girls, who I think during, is it the First or Second World War? The First World War, were in factories using radium paint to paint like dials on clocks and things like that. And obviously as they were painting, they were told by their employers to like clean the brushes in their mouths and things like that. And obviously back then they did not realise at the time how dangerous radium was, and these women slowly became very badly affected by the radium that they were like inhaling and eating, and just, it was horrific. So this book doesn't hold back with some of the really gory details of how the radium affected their bodies, and it does not hold back on painting the employers and the companies that eventually, when all of the evidence came out that it was the radium that made these girls sick and die, that they just did not care. The employers just wanted to wash their hands of these girls that they did so wrong to, and it just goes on and on and on until the very last page, and it's just their fight for like justice through it all. Oh, I just and the way Kate Moore has written this, it's like a fictional story with the way it's written, and you get to know the characters and the girls so personally, because Kate Moore tells you about their families and their relationships and their husbands and their lives and the kind of people they were, and that makes it so much more devastating, because you come to love these girls and then you see the way, you know, they are treated by their employers and obviously their horrible fate. This just is one of those books that I would recommend everybody reads, because like I said, the execution is amazing and the story it's telling is one I think that everyone should know about, and that, you know, justice needs to be served in some kind of way, because finishing this I'm still so angry and I still have all those emotions in me just thinking about it, and this is definitely one that I will keep coming back to. Again, Kate Moore has recently released another book that again I really want to read soon, because this one was just amazing. The next non-fiction book that made the list was Black and British: A Forgotten History by David Olusoga. Yes, I finally got round to reading this beast in 2021. I listened to it on audiobook, which again I would highly recommend, because it is narrated by David Olusoga. I think I'm like 98% sure it's narrated by David Olusoga. Either way, I really enjoyed the audiobook and it helped me get through this very dense book. But one thing I would say is that it looks terrifying, and I was put off by the size of it, because I did think that because it's a history book and it's non-fiction, it was going to be incredibly dense and hard to, you know, take in. However, David Olusoga does an amazing job of making this book and all of the information in it very digestible. So it was understandable for people. I would say that it's even quite accessible to most people, which I was not expecting. And yes, it taught me a lot. I learned the origins of certain things and different sides to different stories. And by the end, it really made me sit and think about Britain as a country today, and how we still tell so many lies, even to children in school. We're teaching them an incorrect history, and how backwards everything is, and how our history is painted in such a white, you know, linear way, and that's not the case at all. So yes, this one was very informative, loved it, very accessible, and again it's one that I would recommend if you have been wanting to read it for ages but you're scared about the size and possibly like intimidated by it. You'll get through it and you will be very glad that you did. The next category is poetry, and there's only one poetry collection that made it onto this list, and that is of course Overshare by Charlotte Friers, who is my lovely, amazing best friend over at Thoroughly Enjoyed Books. I could not have made it through this year without her, and this poetry collection is one of the best poetry collections I've ever read. I cried. I've read it twice and I cried both times, and yeah, I'm just so proud of Shah for writing this in one of the hardest years for her and like most people, and making it just so amazing. So this poetry collection explores a couple of themes, including mental health and trauma, and Shah is just such an amazing writer. Like I said with this one, it just made me feel so many emotions, and that's why I cried twice, even though I've read it before. And she's also going to be writing a new one. She may have already started, but again, very excited to have that in my life, because more poems or a poetry collection by Shah is just gonna make me so happy and feel all of the feelings. And I would say that the reason why this has made the list is because the way Shah has written these poems me reading them, it was like a very freeing experience for me in terms of helping me deal with some of the emotions I was feeling, and have been for a really, really long time. So that is why, of course, this one had to make the list. The next category is translated fiction, and there's only one book in this category, and it was an experience, and I buddy read this with Connor. I will link everyone I mention in the description box, but that is The Vegetarian by Han Kang. When I was reading this, it was the first translated book that I have thoroughly enjoyed in terms of the writing, the concept, just everything about it. But by the end, I think the ending for me was what kind of let it down slightly. It was going to be a 5-star read, but because of the end, it was a 4. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about this book since I finished reading it. And that is why it's made the favourites list, because that's how you know it's a good book, if you can't stop thinking about it. And this one follows our main character Yeong-hee and her husband, and it starts off where Yeong-hee stops eating meat because she has a dream, and she's then suddenly disgusted by meat, and becomes a vegetarian, and things just explode from there. And that's all I'm going to say. It's definitely one of those books where it's best to go in blind, but the writing really kept me going, and the intrigue of it all kept me going. It's a story in sort of like 3 parts, again something I really, really enjoyed, but unfortunately I do feel like the ending kind of let it down slightly for me. But if you like well written, thrilling, dark, translated books, then this one should be on your list. Moving on to classics, again there's only one book that made it onto this list. I think it's probably the only classic, no that's not true, ignore me, but that is of course Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. So 2021 was the year that I read Pride and Prejudice for the first time, and it changed my life. So I read Emma in 2020, and I wanted Emma to be the book that got me into Austen, but unfortunately it wasn't. I did enjoy it, but it didn't like sweep me away. Pride and Prejudice, however, like on the other hand, this one just left me wanting more. It was a 5-star read. I feel like an absolute cliche to say that Pride and Prejudice is probably going to be my favourite Austen novel. I do want to read the rest now. Just everything about this was so amazing. The family aspect, the different Bennet sisters and their personalities. Elizabeth Bennet is definitely a new favourite character of all time for me. I'm obsessed with her. I just think she's amazing. Darcy, their relationship, their ending, just everything. The parents, what's not to love about this book? So yes. Once again, if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend you do so, because there's a reason why Pride and Prejudice is people's favourite Austen book and why it's her most popular, because it's great. The next 2 books are historical fiction books, and the first one on this list is The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. Yes, again, 2021 was the year where I finally read this book, and again, so glad that I did. And as soon as I finished it, again, I knew this was going to be a favourite of mine of all time, and that it was going to make this list, because if you haven't noticed already, I really love well-written books, and this one, again, so well written. I love the format of it as it's written in letters. So this one follows our main character Celie, and it's set in the deep American South between the 2 wars, and it follows Celie's very traumatic life. So she is raped by the man that she calls father, and has her children taken away from her, and then is sort of like abandoned and married off to a husband that she does not love. And then she meets a woman, weirdly through her husband, called Shug Avery, and then I think everything about Celie's life kind of changes in the way she sees people and life and love and all of those things. And it also follows as well Celie's sister Nettie, who gets like taken away from her, and she doesn't see her for years. And it's again just sort of Celie writing these letters about her life, and it's just a beautiful book on the exploration of what life is, and obviously trauma and all these other things. I'm going to leave the content warnings or trigger warnings for all of these books in the description box, because this one has definitely got a few. But again, this book leaves you with that warm, fuzzy feeling at the end of, you know, there is hope, even if you have had a really, really difficult time. So even though it sounds like a very traumatic, deep book, which it is, it doesn't leave you feeling down. It leaves you feeling uplifted. And that is, you know, a difficult thing to do if you think about it. But again, you can see why this one is one that everyone talks about and it's much loved. And I think they should teach this in schools. It really frustrates me that they're teaching Dickens when they could be, you know, getting kids to read this. The second historical fiction book that of course had to make this list is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This book is, I feel like, and I've said this before, but I feel like it was written for me. Again, with its beautiful writing. It is a fictional story about William Shakespeare after the death of his son, but it's so much more than that. It is so much more than that. It mainly kind of follows Shakespeare's wife, and the way the chapters are written, they're sort of they alternate between sort of different years, and it's got a sort of like magical realism kind of aspect to it. It feels like it could have been written by Shakespeare. It just pulls you into the setting of the time that it's set in. It made me feel closer to Shakespeare's plays and his works, and fantastic book. 10 out of 10. I can see why everyone loves it, why it won the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2020, I think. I did have a sticker on it with that, but I've taken it off. And the book itself is absolutely gorgeous, and I cried my eyes out because it was just so wonderful. Another thing I don't really hear people say about this is that there's one particular chapter where it does explore sort of like mental health and depression, which I was not expecting, and it was done so well, and I loved that. So yeah, just beginning to end, loved it. Knew this was going to make the list. Possibly my favourite book of the year, but I don't like to, you know, pick favourites because then that's just a whole other list. The next two books are books that I wasn't sure what genre to put them under. This one is definitely contemporary fiction, but it kind of snuck its way onto the list, and I haven't actually talked about this on my channel yet, but it is Expectation by Anna Hope. Again, one that I wasn't expecting to love, devoured it, and was recommending it to everyone after I read it. I made my mum read it. I was just pushing it into everyone's hands. I wanted to talk to so many people about it because it just changed the way I viewed motherhood and womanhood, which I was not expecting. But this one follows three friends, Hannah, Kate and Lisa, and when they're young and they're like best friends and they're like wild and crazy, and they have this really beautiful like friendship group that is really strong and never ending, and you can kind of tell that they don't really want to grow up and let that go. And then it obviously follows them later on in life. So Lisa is trying to be an actress and get into sort of theatre and sort of struggling. Kate is married and struggling as a new mother, and Hannah is married to Nathan, and they have been trying for a baby for a very long time through IVF. So as you can tell already, that is going to definitely cause some sort of like friction among the friendship group. There are some wild turns in this book that I was not expecting, that kind of took me aback. But again, it is one of those books that by the end, it just leaves you feeling fuzzy and warm, and made me see things in a brand new way. It made me not fear motherhood. Again, it was written in a way that made me sort of like fly through it. It's got the kind of writing I really enjoy, which is simple and easy. I wouldn't say similar to Sally Rooney, but kind of, in that it's not like flowery, it's just to the point, and it works, and it's simple, and it has made Anna Hope be able to write this really amazing book. So I can see why, again, this one did get hype, like a lot of hype when it first came out, and I do want to see more people reading it because I really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars. and like I said, it unexpectedly made it onto this list. And that leads me on to the 11th and final book I wanted to share with you, because it was also possibly my favourite book of the year, but I don't like to pick favourites, as I said, but it was so good. And that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I finished it this morning, I was crying, it was amazing. A book that is much loved by everyone and is hyped, and I can completely understand why. But it follows our main character Addie, who makes a deal in the dark at night time for a different sort of life. However, she doesn't really know the kind of deal she is making, and she soon learns that the deal she has made means that as soon as people leave the room, they forget her. And the concept is amazing, but the way V. Schwab has pulled it off was also, for me, amazing. I really enjoyed the first half of the book, where you kind of learn how Addie has learned to sort of deal with her curse, as it were, because obviously being forgettable means that you can't get a job or, you know, make best friends, fall in love, just all these different things. And it's like the small details that V. Schwab has put into this that made it really, really beautiful for me. And then obviously the second half with the intertwining story that happens and how it ends. And this is just one of those books that, because the concept is so fantastic and it's been pulled off so well and the writing is amazing, it couldn't not be a 5-star book for me. It's the book that's got me back into reading and shown me what reading is meant to be about. It's meant to be about books like this because it was just so beautiful, and I loved the fact that, you know, I still had loads left to read, but then I also didn't want it to end when I was getting towards the end, and it was just so beautiful. I cannot wait to reread this, and again, it's probably going to be one of my favourites of all time. So that was me gushing over some of my favourite books that I read in 2021, and looking at this pile, it just fills me with joy and happiness because I love reading and I love reading great books, and these were all just so fantastic, and I cannot wait to see what the new year brings for some new fantastic books into my life and new favourites. So please let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these, or maybe what your favourite book of 2021 was. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you soon in my next video. Bye!